Hello, dog lovers, and welcome back to this episode of Dear Dog Fanatic. I'm your host, Kirsten, but you can call me Kay. I am a virtual dog trainer and a dog mom of 3. Now, this week I asked my audience over on Instagram. You can follow me at the Canine Detective if you aren't doing so already. And you all said that you'd like me to bring back Reddit stories and Reddit reactions. So here we are, down the Reddit rabbit hole we go. Now, the theme of this episode is going to be working remotely with dogs. So very fittingly, our first story today is from the r/work from home subreddit, and it is entitled, "How do you manage your work from home mornings with a dog?" This OP says, "I'm new to fully remote work and I'm developing a routine from scratch. I'm finding that I am either behind schedule or feeling guilty about choosing between getting ready, making breakfast, walking, and playing with my dog, and moving my body before sitting down to my desk. I'm not getting through everything I want before I give my time to my work. Aside from simply getting up earlier, I think the order of my activities needs some adjustment. How are others managing? Can you share your routines? And FYI, just me and a 3-year-old mini doodle in a townhome, no yard of our own," which is good context to have. So one of our top comments here is, "Get up, make your bed, then take care of the dogs, long walk, playtime, and food. Usually my dog gets tired and then I can work on my morning routine before work. Yes, that means getting up earlier." Someone else says, "During the shutdown, my husband taught from home with a 6-month-old rescue German Shepherd dog. Thankfully, not our first German Shepherd. I know he would get to his desk 2 minutes before class started. The dog would demand attention, so he would often need to crate her. Then he would walk during lunch." Yeah, and it's interesting because if you view these comments together, you can see that perhaps one way to mitigate the German Shepherd barking, of course, I do not know this commenter and their specific situation, but I think that they could perhaps employ some of the strategies that this first commenter did, where you get up, you do the long walk, some playtime and food, and then you're ready to start the workday. And for folks that, depending on where they are in their training journey with their dog, there are some comments either on this post or some of the future posts that we might be getting to today that will say, "Crate your dog during your workday." And I will caveat that if you're going to do this, you need to make sure that you have met their needs before doing so. Someone actually is very kind and breaks down their exact schedule right from 5 a.m. and them getting up to 7 p.m. when they finish going to the gym after work. And yeah, that was very kind of them to do. Some others do break it down. They say that, not only do they walk their dog before work, they give their dog a walk on their lunch break, after work, things like this. Okay, and I'm going to read this one because they also have 3 dogs. And so this commenter says, "I have 3 dogs that I manage before my start time in the morning. I realized a long time ago if I didn't shower and get ready before I got the dogs up, that my self-care wasn't going to happen until sometime later that day. So the first thing I do is start my shower and get ready for my day. My dogs recognize that they don't need to get out of bed just yet. Once I'm ready, we go downstairs and they get a quick potty break in the backyard before I prep coffee and feed the cats. Once they are back in, I start making their breakfast. While they are eating, I tidy up the kitchen and put my shoes on. Then we go for a walk. Walk time has some flexibility. Sometimes they are shorter walks and sometimes they can go for way longer. All kind of depends on when I woke up. But long story short, I am priority first in the morning, and then taking care of them immediately after I am ready has been the only thing that has made sense for me. Otherwise, my self-grooming and care gets left in the dust." And Opie responds to that saying that makes so much sense. Thank you for sharing." And yeah, I think the key lessons we can take from that there are, you need to ensure that your self-care and your needs are taken care of before you start your workday, and you also need to make sure that your dog's needs are taken care of. So whatever order that needs to go in to ensure that both of those things happen before the start of your workday, do what works for you. We are going to move on to our next story here, and this is from the r/remote work subreddit. It's just titled Remote Work with Dogs at Home. Hey y'all, as the title suggests, I am looking for tips on remote working in a dog-friendly household. I've been work from home for about 6 months now. We have 2 dogs, a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old. The 9-year-old will sleep all day, but she does enjoy her play. The 2-year-old, however, will sleep soundly when I have no meetings, and the moment I have an important meeting, he wakes up ready to play or go outside. And he's also a hound, so when he's loud, he's really loud. Looking for any tips you might have on keeping him/them occupied or chill at the most important moments of my day. We take the hound to doggy daycare a few times a month, so that's an option, but that could get pricey if I had to do it every time I needed a disruption-free day. I also give them popsicles, which will keep them busy and quiet for about 15 minutes. I recently started taking him on sniff walks in the morning to release some energy first thing. Thank you. And I think, yeah, absolutely the last bit is probably the most helpful thing that he can do. But let's see what the comments are saying. Someone is suggesting to basically make treats using Kongs that will... So the first commenter also speaks to the Kong. They say, get a Kong and stuff it with a mix of peanut butter, kibbles, some snacks, and freeze it. It will take a dog a while to go through it. Sometimes if needed, the dogs will not be distracted. I'm editing this comment just to make it make more sense. I think they mean sometimes if I need the dogs to not be distracted, such as by people who come by the front doors or windows, I'll keep them in a room in the back of the house while I keep dogs from home. Yeah, absolutely. So part of this comes from knowing your dog, knowing if they're reactive, what are they reactive to? What are their energy needs like? Things like this. And somebody comments below that. I'm just double checking to make sure it's not OP. As someone comments to OP saying, take them out before they cry to go out. He's waking up and bothering you on meetings because all day the house is quiet and now he is hearing you socialize and talk and is taking that as a cue that it's time to wake up and hang out. I would agree with that. That was something that was going through my head is that your dog needs to learn to ignore you while you're talking on the phone, but because they've not been trained to do that, they are being woken up by OP speaking on the phone and now thinks, oh, now's a good time to play. Someone responds to that saying, you could also try crate training him in another room and covering the crate with a blackout cover. We will also play lo-fi music for ours when she's in the crate. When trained properly, the crate can be a good cue for when they need to settle down. Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially if you are only doing a couple of calls a day, there's no reason why you can't build this into your dog's routine. That, you know, when you have a Zoom call, they get to go in their crate and they get their Kong, their licky mat, the what have you, and they can have their nap time. That seems perfectly reasonable. And again, that will be really easy to do if you've sufficiently exercised your dog beforehand. Someone responds to the original post saying, exercise my dog for a minimum of 1 hour daily so that they can sleep all day while I work. Since your dog is a hound, you might want to aim for 2 times the 1 hour long walks daily. And OP responds to that saying, I will try that, thank you. Yeah, I think definitely upping the exercise will be really helpful for this poster. And with that, we will move on to our next story, which is actually this time from the r/dog training tips subreddit. It's entitled Switching Back to Fully Remote Work. We have a 10-month-old pup, and I work from home 2 days a week and 2 days a week in the office. Starting next week, I'm going to be fully remote for at least 6 months and possibly up to a year. Right now, our pup doesn't seem to show much separation anxiety. He will cry for a couple of minutes if we crate him and leave. He is calm when we come back, and I feel like he is not exhibiting anxiety. I will say in the last couple of weeks, he's started to become snuggly, and it's not like trying to pet an alligator. I think they're making the joke that normally beforehand their puppy was more bitey, doing that puppy play bite thing. However, I'm worried that being home all the time is going to create anxiety in the future. What should I be looking for and trying to prevent now? I do keep him separated from me now. When I work from home, he either hangs out in his pen or I work in another room. Yeah. And I think OP is probably being particularly conscious because we saw a rise in separation anxiety amongst the pet population during COVID due to the dogs not being trained to be okay being by themselves. we'll get into the comments first and then I'll share my thoughts. I find that being around the dog can build confidence for being alone more than leaving them does. You need to build their confidence in other ways, but being around your dog all the time, you may notice that occasionally they leave the room to go do their own thing or just lie down by themselves. Separation anxiety doesn't happen because the dog is never alone. It happens because they don't know how to cope on their own. I would agree with that statement. One can feed into the other, but absolutely a lot of it is the dog being able to be comfortable being on their own. Building up your dog's confidence and teaching them general coping skills is much more important than building up time apart. That said, it's likely you will spend time apart from your dog even when you work remotely, so it's unlikely to be a problem. Yeah, like unless you're, and again, we saw this more in the pandemic too, because even folks that work from home, you know, we'd go out to the gym or go out and see friends and things like that. In the pre-COVID world, during the pandemic, people weren't going out to the gym or the movies or restaurants or what have you, of course, because things were shut down. And so that's partly what contributed to the additional cases of separation anxiety. This is not to say that you're not going to have separation anxiety in your dog now, but this was a more extreme situation for a little bit where people really were not going anywhere. So someone responds to this saying, as long as you regularly leave him home alone to some extent, he'll be fine. Going grocery shopping, going to a movie, a restaurant, etc. is enough. You don't need to keep him separated from you all workday. And I would absolutely agree with that. One of my previous clients was this senior woman who had a Pomeranian puppy, and she was really proactive in this pup's training. And part of the reason why we were working together is at that time I was an in-house dog trainer for a doggy daycare, and she took the dog to daycare specifically so that way a few times a week the dog would spend time away from her to not develop separation anxiety. The pros and cons and how that turned out is a story for another day, but this just goes to show that you can be intentional about spending time away from your dog. That does not require locking them up for your whole workday, in addition to most likely the whole time that you're sleeping in the evening. That's probably, if you can help it, more than what is healthy for a dog to be in a crate. And we can get the nuance of how long a dog should or should not be in a crate and whether or not crates are necessary, etc., is its own other debate, which is a story for another podcast episode. I'm just scrolling here to see. Yeah, and with that, we'll move on to the next story. So this one is from the r/remote work subreddit and is entitled, Got offered a work from home gig, but it will require a quiet workspace. I have dogs. The I have dogs is in all caps. Any tips on a good noise canceling headset in case they bark? So as I said, I got offered a remote job and it pays great, but I'll be on the phone with clients all day. Maybe 2 to 4 times a day. Something in my neighborhood was set maybe 2 to 4 times a day. Something in my neighborhood will set my dogs off and they go ape. I really want to accept this position because the pay is great. But besides soundproofing my office and separation, what is a good headset to cancel background noises? I've got a Pit and a Belgian Malinois, so one is all bass and the other is like a banshee screech. Lol. These are the piece words, not mine. So let's get into the comments. First one says, my dog barked next to my computer while I was using the computer mic and Teams filtered it out. You'll be fine. Someone responds to that saying, yep, nobody hears my dogs or my granddaughter. And when people apologize about their dogs in the background, I think I can actually hear them like 1 out of 10 times. Even then, I have to try. Apps are just really good. Apps are just really, really good at noise cancellation now. Oh, and this is great. So OP responds to that saying, this might be the first time I've exhaled since I started stressing about it, lol. And this is one of the good aspects of Reddit when Reddit is done right, is it really can be a community atmosphere where we can get advice from one another. Someone responded to that comment saying, just a warning though, we use Teams and I absolutely just heard someone's vacuum outside while she's in her home office. So that might be dependent on your headphone/sound system. Maybe something to further soundproof the door is a good idea. Someone else says, I've had the same experience. I have an expensive Jabra, apologies if I'm saying that wrong, headset that I use for when my kids are around, but I don't need it for most other noises. Yeah, so this seems to be a case-by-case basis. I use a microphone as well as my noise canceling headset, so that way also when people are on a call with me or on a recording, it's going through this mic rather than my computer's mic, which has noise canceling properties. It also just gives me a crisp sound. You might not care about that if you are working from home doing something corporate. If you're taking a lot of calls with people, especially if those people are clients, I think the mic setup might be really helpful just for clarity of sound, as well as you do have these options to dampen the external noises. There's also just the option to mute when there is explosive noise, although of course that is not going to be the option if the barking continues over and over. Yeah, if this was my client, my advice would be kind of entirely dependent on what their actual routine looks like for work, what their routine looks like for their dogs, and what their home setup looks like. Because we've seen a lot in the stories today of different strategies to use, and that's all going to be very dependent on each unique situation of what's actually going to work. But yeah, oh great. I love when Reddit proves me right. So another commenter says, you might split your headset into a microphone and headphones, then get a condenser microphone. These are highly directional and designed to work at close distances, 6 to 12 inches from your face. So even before application-based noise filters kick in, you can cut background noises by 60% or more. And someone responds to that saying, this is the way. For those that got that reference, you're my people. I have a Yeti mic and my dogs bark out the window all the time. The folks on the phone never hear it, which is fantastic. Let's move on to our fifth and final story in this episode. We are zooming through, but this is a topic that is important to me. It's something that a lot of my clients struggle with. And so I'm just happy to hear that some of these Redditors are getting some advice that they can use in their real life that will help them with their dogs and with their job. So the last story we're going to read is from the r/reactive dog subreddit, and it is titled Starting a Remote Job with a Dog Who Barks All the Time. And I'm interested now because this is in the reactive dog sub. What kind of reactivity are we dealing with? So my dog has been on fluoxetine since September 4th. I've noticed that he doesn't bark as often as he used to, which is good. But it's still hard for me to relax without him barking at my mom across the house who's doing miscellaneous things. It's been really difficult because she usually gets up at 5 a.m., so he wakes me up at 5 a.m. by barking. I talked to my vet recently and they suggested either adding in Purina Pro Calming Care or Xylkine. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. I was able to finally get a job and I start on November 10th, but it is a remote job. I haven't been able to find employment full-time for a year, even with experience and a degree. Yeah, in this economy, it is rough. So I'm taking what I can get in case anyone is wondering. I feel like his barking is really going to make this job extremely stressful, which is why I'm looking into what I can do now. He is always over threshold pretty much immediately, even on fluoxetine. So I haven't really tried any training for a while. Yeah, I have thoughts, but I'm going to pin mark that. I'm just wondering what I can do to help his anxiety and barking. Before he got onto fluoxetine, he wouldn't even sleep through the day. He would just bark at every single noise coming from her side of the house. I think her meaning the OP's mom. It's gotten better, but I want to try and improve it more. So we're going to go to the comments and I will give you my takes. Somebody suggests getting a really good noise canceling headset. My dog barks all day and my colleagues tell me they never hear him. And OP responds to that saying, unfortunately, we're only allowed to use the equipment that the company gives us and it doesn't have noise canceling. Someone else comments saying, you'd be surprised. The structure will likely really help him. Use the mute button. Start conditioning, calm, and desensitizing now. Yeah, so advocating for training. There are a lot of apps that cancel out background noise. I can't hear my nephew talk to me sometimes because he's talking to me on my brother's iPhone, which is trained to focus on his voice and tune out kids. Someone else comments suggesting and you keep him in her room with a noise machine on while you're working, I think that would be the easiest way to try to deal with this. Or if you have outdoor space, leave him outside if possible. I work from home and my dogs bark quite a bit, but I also make sure they're far enough away if I'm on the phone so people can't really hear them. The barking is so annoying. I don't advocate for this because then you don't know what your dogs are getting into. They're practicing that unwanted behavior. And also now you're just annoying your neighbors. So I think that's kind of a selfish move. Depending on where you are. Maybe if you were out in the middle of the countryside, you don't need to worry about the neighbors, but that's still not great for the dogs. But let's see what somebody says. OP responds to this comment saying, if he was in her room, he would probably just bark at her and scratch at her door until she let him out. He reacts whenever she moves and makes noise, so that would probably not work. We do have a backyard, but keeping him out there all day probably isn't feasible because I live in Texas. She could let him in, but then he would just scratch at the office door for me to be. She could let him in and out, but he would probably just scratch at the office door for me to let him in. Yeah, so definitely training will be helpful here. It sounds like probably the dog needs to practice not being by OP's side. I think probably their exercise needs maybe aren't being met. They need some additional outlets. Crate training could potentially be quite helpful. But yeah, it just sounds like a lot more training needs to be done for the dog's quality of life and for OP's peace of mind. And OP clarifies in a comment, wanted to add that it's like a receptionist job, so I can't exactly mute myself. I'll be taking calls from customers from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. A deleted user comments, I ended up having the same issue and built a soundproof office. Yeah, I think there's multiple issues that need to be addressed here. There's the problem OP faces that obviously they need to make sure that the dog's barking isn't disrupting their work. But then there's also the problem of why the dog is barking in the first place, and that needs to be addressed. It looks like they're taking the steps with medication, but training also needs to be in place. So I would definitely recommend that this person work with a trainer. This is the kind of clients that I work with to ensure that people can work from home peacefully with their dogs. And I'm hoping, this was 7 months ago and we don't have an update, so I'm hoping that OP is still at that remote job and things are looking up for them and their pup. But that is it for this week's episode. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Reading Reddit is always really fun. If you identified with any of the OPs in this episode today, if you too work from home with your dog or dogs, whether that be as a freelancer, an entrepreneur, a remote salaried worker, I would really appreciate it if you would take 5 minutes to fill out this survey that I've got going on. It is the 2026 International Remote Workers with Dogs Survey. I'm essentially just trying to gather data so that way I can better help my clients and people in my ecosystem, whether or not that's through this podcast and my free resources or my one-to-one clients. I have assumptions, and I have also experience having worked with clients previously and currently who work from home with their dogs, but I don't know everyone's unique situation. So I'm hoping to collect this data and create a report so that way we can be more successful working remotely with our dogs by gathering these insights and the best practices of those in our online community. But that's enough of me for today. Thank you again so much for tuning in. My links to absolutely everything will be in the show notes. Remember to give your dog some scritches for me, and I will see you next time on Dear Dog Fanatic. Bye now.